Friends, hello. Today we have a very interesting episode about a hot topic, about our intestines. Previously, the intestines were thought of as just a tube that grinds up food, but now we've come to understand that the intestines are a very important organ, because many fascinating friends or foes live there. And to get to the bottom of this topic, today I invited a candidate of biological sciences, a very cool specialist, Dimitri Alekseev. Dim, thanks for coming. Hi. Yes, Dim, let's get started. There are lots of questions. We'll cover them in a friendly chat. I really hope to get a lot of answers myself.
Let me focus on you, understanding eyes, and we move forward. Yes.
We have a very smart, well-read audience, and I'm really glad that even these seemingly complex topics, not hype topics, but truly complex ones, are appreciated. They're popular because this kind of science popularization, including what we have planned today, is in demand. And the fact that people have started to take an interest in this, and not just in some public pages with humor or, I don't know, funny videos, that's cool. People are getting smarter. I see it in my appointments. Sometimes people come in who know even more than some doctors, and that's really cool. Let's start by explaining to someone who doesn't know anything about how the intestines work. So what is the microbiome?
Yeah, look, it's super interesting that this concept itself only recently appeared in science and medicine. These are really very new ideas. For the first time, this word about a community of bacteria that does something appeared more or less recently. Probably the late 90s. All the main studies on the importance of the influence of microbes living in the gut on health happened there, starting from 2007. This science is only from the last 15-20 years, so it's still very new. That's why some doctors aren't aware of it yet. Sometimes doctors, such as gastroenterologists in clinics, may not have received this information yet. He will think that it's some kind of quackery. Yes, that's the story on one hand. On the other hand, there has always been an understanding that some microbes live in the intestines. As kids, we used to bring those empty mayonnaise jars or matchboxes to the clinic. They would give us a sheet that said things like bifidobacteria, lactobacilli, E. coli detected, good, these others not detected, also good. The main breakthrough happened when we got genetic technologies in our hands. When we suddenly started measuring the DNA of microbes in the gut, it turned out that there are way more microbes living there than we previously thought. And since there are so many of them, it means they all serve some purpose. In biology, living things never have anything unnecessary. And when they started studying the connection between different types of microbes and, for example, various diseases, every time they found the importance of a certain type, its significance, and so on and so on. Indeed, first and foremost, microbes in the gut are involved in digestion. But secondly, for example, they control immunity and inflammation. And this is easiest for us biologists to understand because we always look at things in the context of evolution, and in the context of evolution, the gut is actually the body's first organ, with everything else built around it. And along with the appearance of the first gut, the first microbes were already living there. They lived there to help us digest food and to protect the gut from external factors. That's all. For 200-300 million years, evolution favored the strongest animals and their internal microbes. If these microbes gave it an advantage in resisting diseases, in obtaining food, in its fertility, creativity, speed, strength, and so on, then it would pass on its offspring, passing these microbes in the gut, and it continued. And we are, in fact, the heirs. This is at the pinnacle of evolution, adaptation. When we go inside the intestine, the only reason we actually went there is expediency. If our health and intestines were all right, we probably wouldn't have found so much money for this research, you know. It turns out that at the same time as genetic technologies were developing, this era of huge problems in human health and chronic diseases also arrived. Their epidemic has been growing in waves since the middle of the last century. There are more and more of them, and they are affecting younger people. And let's say immunologists, as far as I understand, at some point they hit a dead end. They say it's too complicated to explain and we wouldn't understand. We see sort of the immunological consequences of inflammation, which lead to various diseases, from diabetes to metabolic disorders to some age-related conditions, yes, neurodegeneration. But we can't put it all together, even despite all our understanding of dozens of types of immune cells. And when the knowledge appeared that there are different microbes in our gut that can interact with our body, it was a real medical breakthrough. For an ordinary person, it's important to understand that in this tube, yes, in its lower part, in the large intestine, that's where the main microbes actually live. I always try to find some simple analogies for myself, you know. I picture it like this. We sort of have a contract with them. What is this contract about? We collect food on the surface, unlike microbes that can't move as fast. From this food, we absorb what we can easily digest: proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. For 12 hours, the stomach and small intestine handle our digestion with our enzymes. Then, for the next 12 hours, the large intestine, which is really thicker compared to the small intestine, holds what we couldn't digest. Basically, this is mostly plant cell walls, what we call dietary fiber, and in the large intestine, microbes sort of finish digesting it. This process is scientifically called fermentation. Thankfully, we're familiar with this word because the same thing that happens in a jar of sauerkraut happens in our intestines. Microbes digest dietary fibers and produce organic acids. And our body is designed in such a way that this process must always take place. That our diet has always been like this. For the past, probably for millions of years of evolution, for intestines like ours, it always had to contain microbial food. We are not predators, we are omnivores. We can eat this and that, even mushrooms, plants, meat, and so on. The structure of our intestines is adapted so that fermentation should take place for 12 hours. And in fact, along with modern changes in nutrition, it turned out that all modern food is very well absorbed and digested in our mouth, stomach, and small intestine, and nothing is left for the large intestine. We love anything soft, easy to digest, and similar. And so, the combination of these problems is that we haven't fed our microbes, but we've learned to identify which ones, and because they're not being fed. The explosion of diseases that we can't explain, from cancer to metabolic disorders, has led to the flourishing of this field of knowledge. Well, simply put, the microbiome, by definition, is microbes. Like in our picture, different little creatures, microscopic ones. Also, scientists, who often use poetic definitions, describe the entire theater of their interactions, because they produce, well, probably hundreds of thousands of molecules. Yes, and all these molecules somehow interact with our intestines, enter the systemic bloodstream, and so on. And all this interaction with them is what we call the microbiome. That is, it's the lumen of the intestine, the intestinal wall, what's near the wall, and especially the characteristics of our mucus. If we get into this topic today, it's incredibly interesting. The intestinal lining itself, unlike our skin that we're used to, is thick and rough. The intestine has a single cell layer, making it very sensitive to internal changes. And right behind this layer of cells, there are, well, estimates vary. The most interesting thing is that when they say 70% of all immune cells are located right under the mucosa at any given moment, what are they doing there and how do they interact? Microbes are on one side, the immune system on the other, and they communicate through this. If the microbes are doing well, the immune system is fine. If the microbes are not doing well, if we haven't fed them, the immune system switches to a state of concern, inflammation, and so on. And basically, that's what the whole game is about, and probably our entire conversation today will be about this.
I have a question then. What ways are there for an ordinary person to study this microbiota? And does an ordinary person need to check and study it?
Yes, that's a great question. Actually, I have dedicated about 10 years of my life to truly answering this question. I was convinced that everyone should use genetic tests to study the contents of their poop. In fact, yes, it's not an invasive test. Here we extract DNA. We read the sequence of this DNA and determine which microbes live inside you. I did this in the lab, first comparing groups of patients with inflammatory bowel diseases, and you get the result. Then I had a company that moved to England and then left, and we had these tests produced in different parts of the world. And it seemed to me that this needed to be conveyed to everyone. And it was like, you know how? A desire to help people with technology. Yeah, and these really are modern technologies, you know. You also work with genetics, like those genetic tests for cancer or predispositions. That's all super cool. But in reality, as a practicing doctor, you would say there are much more practical things for everyone and for public health that are actually more useful than just doing genetic testing for everyone. And the same thing happened to me. I realized that maybe not everyone needs this. And basically, by looking at your plate, looking in your toilet, and interacting with your own smells, you can already get very valuable information. On the one hand. And, well, the most important thing is that genetic tests are expensive. Yes, I mean, we can culture microbes, but that's how we used to do it with the old methods. But the problem is that most microbes don't grow or can't be cultured on petri dishes.
Yes, by the way, what percentage can't be cultured?
Well, out of all the diversity, probably 90% can't be cultured. Bifidobacteria and lactobacilli can be cultured, and we've managed some others, but most microbes still can't. Why is that? Because inside the intestine, they're very dependent on each other. And to culture a single bacterium, you need to provide it with its complete diet. But you can't guess it, because they live there in a crowd. Right? They are not alone there. It also relies on 10 other microbes, creating a dense symbiosis. So only these aerobic bifido, lacto, and E. coli and various pathogens are cultured, but all the other intestinal bacteria are so tightly attached to our intestines that even our body somehow feeds them on its own. Well, research is being done, but it's a pointless endeavor. Studying their DNA this way is a normal technology. You can do polymerase chain reaction tests. Now, there are such tests in laboratories. They're registered there. When you can use a very specific piece of DNA to determine which microbe you have, there could be 16 or 32 types. You can determine their balance in the gut. That's it. Well, it's much cheaper than sequencing DNA. For example, a polymerase chain reaction test might cost around 3,000 to 5,000 rubles at retail, while DNA sequencing can cost over 10,000. And it's expensive because
It's not widespread.
It's expensive because it's truly a scientific technology. For now, we're also trying to adapt it for medical purposes, but the result is questionable. Yeah, I mean, you know, like, for example, for diabetics, right? All technologies for diabetics are very cheap because there are tons of them in the world. Yeah.
Spinal muscular atrophy medications, remember the ones they raise hundreds of millions for? Yeah. Why? Because very few people have it. If every other person had this disease, the price would be lower.
And so what we faced is that by pushing this idea of genetic testing and then making it cheaper and so on, we face the fact that in reality, the doctor says, why do I need so much information since initially you are selling this to the doctor? First, and second, it's absolutely clear that if today you ate normally, had some fiber, a salad and so on, but tomorrow you go out with friends to celebrate New Year's. Yeah, you start drinking, overeating meat and so on, then your poop will be completely different, like night and day. So the question is, what exactly are we measuring? Yeah, so how are we going to assess human health? And in general, although this research is interesting and gives us some clues, yeah, I would leave this area, you know, for those we used to call early adopters, people who like new things in technology. The key point is that tens of thousands have taken our tests. The most important thing I realized is that it gives a person the understanding that they have DNA inside them and that microbes live inside them. Now he took the test, now he truly believes it, he paid money for it, and now he'll tell everyone that yes, I have microbes living inside me. I checked it with a test. It cost a certain number of 1,000 rubles, that's it. How useful is it? Yes, in the end, how much we can actually interpret this information is also a very big question because, well, imagine when you have 200 different parameters and a library of foreign publications about the microbiota with 40,000 articles. You can link any fact to any parameter. Yes, you'll find it there. It's present in Italian grandmothers who live over 100 years, and you have it too. Is that good or bad? All these interpretation games are fun, but they just become a kind of scientific entertainment test. It's very hard to find your way into medicine. And for example, again in my career, there was this stage of implementing this expensive test into the most advanced healthcare system in the United Kingdom, the only place where it was clear that it would fit in well. This is immunotherapy. Immunotherapy is used for cancer diseases. These are very expensive drugs. In the United Kingdom, a course of treatment costs from 150 to 200,000 pounds. A person who understands this, who researches it, says directly, with this dinosaur it's 50-50. Either this immunotherapy will cure it or it won't. And now there is an opportunity to assess this. By initially doing a test, a person's microbiota can be used to predict whether this immunotherapy will be successful or not. And so when you have 200 pounds you pay at the entrance and you can predict the outcome of a 200,000 procedure, then yes, it makes some sense. And in all other cases, there are more demonstrative tests, more informative and easier for doctors to interpret. And so it just remains a background story.
Wife, let me give you an example. Did you know urologists once drank urine? Yes, not because they really liked it, but because there were no other ways back then. Yeah, they evaluated it by its appearance, by its smell, and drank it. Can you imagine?
If it's sweet or not sweet, yes, if.
There's sugar in it. And can you imagine, you get cold, you have 10 calls, and in the evening you go around the wards and taste urine. Well, that's not great. The main thing here is not to go completely primitive and just look at the color and stop there. And I really like that you're working on such breakthrough things, and we're working together on my vitamins, and you're helping us develop prebiotics now. That's really cool, because I really like that you're so unconventional.
And, your logic too. Well, about prebiotics, we might come back to that topic again today. I just want to say, when you look at what's happening on the market, what people are actually buying, I'm a bit involved in what's going on with supplements. Psyllium husk or plantago seed husk is becoming popular and is a good supplement by itself. Originally, yes, back in the 70s. Yes, it's a type of fiber, but the way it's produced, imported, packaged, and so on matters. Yes, that's mostly it. Well, I don't know if I can say this on your show, but it's junk. Really, it's junk. And most likely it could even be harmful because
it's produced
from such soil.
Yeah, listen, and many people, when they look at, say, supplements, they only look at the price and what's written on the box. And they don't care about quality control, good raw materials, or production conditions. Of course, if you work honestly, pay your taxes, and pay all salaries officially.
Unfortunately, people don't understand the process and how complicated it all is, so they can't appreciate why one and the same psyllium costs this much and another costs that much. Well, and here, I think the only thing is, in the end, yes, we'll look at some honest reviews, because it's impossible to buy hundreds of thousands of reviews there. Yes, you'll see. Well, the results people get. Yes, in fact, we won't be running a clinic for supplements for everyone right now. And this is an attempt to create what's called value for money. Yes, so that it's economically justified and also makes sense, so that a person understands why they need to take it. So that it's a smart solution that works better than just eating 2 spoons of some questionable husk from China. That's cool. It's an interesting challenge. And again, that's what I like about having started in this field. And it was about complex, some kind of genetic stories, like discovering the DNA of some new bacteria that was important. And now some things, yes, from the point of view of, for example, a good prebiotic, they're simple. How do you explain to a person whether it works or not? Yes, like stool frequency. Yes, it increased. For example, you didn't go before, but now go daily, and your stool is more regular. A person actually understands it themselves, even intuitively says, listen, I really feel great now, like a solid 4+ out of 5.
Tell me, how does the microbiome, from your perspective, differ from the microbiome of a regular doctor? As a doctor, because I have an episode filmed about the microbiome, a big one, I tried to figure it out myself, and even for me it was difficult when I specifically tried to study PubMed. It's a system path, and I didn't release it, because I understand that my level of competence is not enough to tell what's true and what's not, because just being able to read PubMed and translate articles, if you don't have enough practical experience or personal scientific experience as a researcher, you won't be able to understand what's true and what's not, because you can find any point of view. 10 articles that support it and 10 articles that refute it. Take me as an example, an average person with a Soviet education who sees the gut, as we've said, as just a tube, and something lives there. Lactobacillus lives there, maybe 2 or 3 more types of bacteria. He'll tell you, so tell me, what does the typical doctor's opinion about the microbiota and its role look like?
Yeah, I think, in general, our overall mindset of doctors and consumers, that's often what I see. Yes, because I travel all over Russia and give lectures to doctors. That it's often shaped by marketing, those evening television commercials where they show ads about constipation, plus
Aktiv melki?
Yes. Plus, there's also marketing from pharmaceutical companies, because pharmaceutical companies give doctors some lectures, some standard facts. Doctors realize not everything is included. Microbes overcome and withstand stomach acid, and that's why special capsules are needed. That's one aspect. It's simplified. It often seems to people that microbes are about that. Well, like in the picture we have here, right? There are some little things floating around. They're probably useful in some way. They release something good, and the bad ones fight with the good ones. These are all very clear and useful facts to know. But when you really try, it's all, well, like you correctly say in your work, at your level, to pack it all into some coherent theory. For example, what I understood is that these microbes, and that's also very interesting, for example, they can't be separated from the food bolus. Yes, we usually consider the food bolus. It's usually seen as separate, though a gastroenterologist might care about its composition, destination, and what it becomes. Actually, this is one of the key processes that happens in our intestines. Initially, yes, it's solid, then we chew the food, moisten it with saliva, and from there all the way to feces. There is a constant transformation of the mass. This happens over 24 hours. From there, I don't know, you chewed on some carrots and lettuce. Yes, here at the entrance, then about 18 hours later in this one. This mess will be seeded with 50 trillion microbes that grew from what you ate. And in the middle of this process, there are bile acids. The toxins that come out of the liver will be absorbed into this food mass, and part of its role will be detoxification. Overall, it's the entire organism, meaning evolutionary adaptations in digestion. From a certain perspective, they're a bit irrational, right? I mean, if we were to design it again, we'd make it smarter. But that's how it turned out, right? The worm crawled, gnawed at the earth, and all of that passed right through us. And the body learned to use this process, well, as best as it could. And to separate even by the different zones of the intestine. For example, yes, perhaps not consciously, or forgetting one thing while remembering another. For example, about sorbents, yes, in general. We know that there are enterosorbents, different generations of these enterosorbents. Probably when you get poisoned, something like, yes, it's important there, and so on and so on. But let's say a doctor is unlikely to think that, let's put it this way, a healthy diet has its own sorption capacity, and it's actually quite large. Yes, if we take these recommended 30 grams of fiber, that's actually a very large surface area for this sorption. Yes, that's really a lot of different polysaccharides that retain moisture very well, and with this moisture they hold a large amount of both fat-soluble and water-soluble toxic compounds. And now, let's say someone maybe after some New Year's drinking took some Enteros gel once and it made them feel better. That's one thing. Here's another. Imagine a person who eats a healthy diet 365 days a year, and their food bolus absorbs a sufficient amount, including sex hormones. Yes, for women, for example, it's a clear story that female sex hormones, the way they change, are detoxified through the liver and excreted through the intestines. When they come out with the bile, they need something to bind to. Yes, these are fat-soluble hormones, and if your food bolus is normal, microbes also help by making it stickier. For example, at some point, this whole train with these detoxified substances leaves your body. If you eat white bread, sliced bread, chips, Lay's, and similar foods, they're already in your stomach. Well, it disappears. You don't have a food bolus, so there's nothing for it to absorb onto. And basically, these toxic compounds start to circulate in the cycle of enterohepatic circulation. We can't even show this. Well, it's really hard to study this properly. Yes, there is indirect evidence, for example, for chemotherapy patients. We know that a person has undergone chemotherapy, and we know what toxic substance is present in their body. We start feeding this person fiber while another person is not given fiber, and in the end, we measure the concentration of this target substance in their feces. It turns out that the person we feed fiber to has a larger stool volume and a higher concentration as well. That means he eliminates the toxic compound much faster, and that's exactly what we need for a patient after chemotherapy. And here, well, it's like understanding these simple physiological things. It should guide the medical community. Yes, this is the direction now. Is that right? Integrative medicine. Well, it's not about sitting in the lotus position after a chemotherapy procedure and thinking you'll feel better. But when you, for example, use modern treatments and make some changes to the usual standard urban diet, you help a person because you understand how physiological functions work. And here it seems that this is exactly the gap you're talking about. What we were taught in medical school, well, that's medical school. The definition of evidence-based medicine states that every doctor practicing it, including all our doctors, fits this description. He must be constantly engaged in education and understand that his basic education includes residency, internship, and so on. This is just the foundation for him to start reading, studying, and understanding how the human body works. For himself, the overthrow of learning. Well, the positive thing is that now we can already create some more complex protocols. Yes, what is called adjuvant therapy in medicine, meaning auxiliary treatments, for example, in addition to the main drug, like
Chemotherapy, adjuvant therapy, and radiation therapy are available.
Adjuvant, and with it, yes, something else. And in general, even what pharmaceutical companies sell, like after antibiotics, take probiotics, and that's how 95% of probiotics are sold in our country. Because, well, the doctor wrote it in the prescription and then said, also get this at the pharmacy. This is also a kind of adjuvant therapy. This is the simplest example, probably with the most proven effectiveness. We understand that a person who, after taking antibiotics, takes at least some beneficial microbes in general, has a lower chance of prolonged antibiotic-associated diarrhea. That's the direction we're moving in, and here, well, I think that any thoughtful doctor... Now, there are also support specialists who help people navigate things, and they can come up with more complex treatment protocols. Yes, with some extra, even auxiliary substances, or ideally, nutrition. Or most importantly, to come up with and help a person interact preventively with their microbiome and take care of their health.
Tell me, what does the microbiome feed on? We eat many things, but what does it actually eat? I also need an answer to this question to understand what I should eat to feed it well.
Well, let's put it this way. Historically and evolutionarily, our species has always had a sufficient amount of solid, fibrous food in our diet. Plant-based stuff. Yes, during dry periods, or say in winter, when there are no animals you can hunt, people would gather things like roots, cacti, and so on and so forth. Something like that? Well, so we used to consume a sufficient amount of indigestible things, even up to wood. Yes, dietary fibers. By definition, what are dietary fibers? It's something of plant origin, and it isn't digested in your stomach or small intestine by the enzymes your body produces. Microbes have about 10,000 enzymes that can break down different sugars, while we only have about a dozen. There are also dozens of types of sugars, and they are connected to each other in very complex ways. There are a lot of such compounds, and accordingly, microbes can break everything down into individual sugars, while we can only break down a small amount. This is food for microbes, that is, polysaccharides, dietary fiber, cell walls, husks, and so on and so forth. This is basically how it developed in evolution. Yes, if there had always been a lot of soft food, we would have a different intestine. But it happened that sometimes there was food, sometimes there wasn't, and mostly it was plant-based food. As for animals, try to catch one first. So it turned out that our intestines are adapted to extract enough nutrients from the cell walls of plants with the help of our microbes. And accordingly, we need to feed ourselves with these cell walls.
So now, every time I eat, I should understand that fiber is not just bulk. It's not just a method. A brush, as some doctors say, a brush for the intestines is also
food for bacteria. Yes, the most, visual example. We write children's books too, and the most visual way is really to explain to a person, you fed yourself and you also need to feed your population, right? You're the president of your own country, you have voters there, them. Let's get to it right away.
About fiber. Question. We're used to getting our daily fiber intake either once a day or in the form of some dried alternative, like psyllium, for example. In general, what's the right way? Should every meal contain fiber? And overall, how much fiber does our gut need per day?
Since we have time, I'll start. There was a man named Dennis Burkitt. He was a British epidemiologist who studied issues of cardiovascular mortality in African countries and in developed countries. And he discovered that wild tribes, somewhere around the 1960s, had an amazing state of cardiovascular health with clean blood vessels. Much better than that of modern Britons at that time. He began investigating and was the first in the late 1960s to write about fiber. He saw that they had a sufficient amount of fiber in their diet. 40 years passed, and for the first time, the first recommendations appeared. But what was done during this time? When we look at the life expectancy statistics of hundreds of thousands of people today, we see that starting from a certain amount of fiber consumption per day, your risks drop sharply. All-cause mortality, death from any cause like cardiovascular, cancer, or metabolic diseases, is reduced by about 15-20%. The risk of mortality. That's great. It could mean about 5 more years. It will distinguish people who eat little fiber, about 5 1/3 ounce and above. This is the dose, and this is the threshold dose that shows up in statistics. We can't argue with that anymore. There's some dental technician from Israel who writes that fiber is bad. In interviews, people often write, but this doctor, or so-called doctor, claims fiber will kill us all. Well, I don't even comment on that. There are massive statistics that can't be influenced by any Masonic conspiracy, pharmaceutical companies, or anything like that. Indeed, people who consume a lot of fiber live longer. You
do understand that there's a term called cherry picking, right? Yes. Well, it's the same thing as with omega. Like omega is supposedly a deadly poison, and you should never, ever take it under any circumstances. They use that for attention. Thousands of studies show it's beneficial, though only some do. As I mentioned today, excessive antioxidants can also be harmful. Too little is harmful, balance is needed in everything. By twisting facts, vitamin D and omega are made to seem like poisons, drawing attention to themselves. That's why I'm not surprised that in such a poorly studied topic, even for doctors, there are people who, in my opinion, are either sincerely mistaken or are really trying to hype themselves up, as the trendy word goes.
Well, yes. So we've determined the amount. It's 25 1 ounce. That's for whom?
What should the person's weight?
Well, let's say women, men, let's say around 60-70 kilograms, maybe 80. That's about the same amount. You know, at a certain point, weight doesn't really matter anymore. Because our intestines are all the same. The same. It doesn't matter how much extra belly you carry around. It's just the amount. The second question is how we consume throughout the day, how we decide on the prices. RAL follows. Yes, these standards are set by the World Health Organization at 25 1 ounce. And the recommendations that exist in all the leading, healthcare systems as well. They say this should come from vegetables. And our healthy guideline is 5 servings of vegetables. A serving of vegetables is about the size of your own fist, so you don't have to weigh it. 5 fists of vegetables. That's a lot. Hardly any of our viewers eat that much unless they're vegetarian. Yeah, well, and
vegetables are expensive, I'll say, especially good ones.
That's another story about expensive things. I also handle economic and food issues since I work in the food industry. Just a small note though. A century ago, for example, food made up a large part of household expenses. It was incredible. Up to 70–80% of expenses went to food, but not anymore. It's very little that we spend on food now, and we treat it like garbage. Let's remember our grandmothers, who would save breadcrumbs. Yes, that's a different attitude. Ironically, cheap food has backfired on us, and we still want it cheaper, but that's not possible, right? Healthy food is expensive, it costs money, and someone has to provide it for you. In the past,
people lived and worked mainly to feed themselves. The word feed means food. I spent 80% of my earnings on food.
Yes, well, that's in vegetables, yes. Accordingly, you can replace it with spoons of dry matter, or just add it. Yes, for a city dweller, that's the best option.
Give a specific example. Look, I eat I do intermittent fasting, but I eat 5 times a day. Should I just add a little bit of salad everywhere or have 2 full meals and 3 times? Fiber. And how should I eat fiber? Just by itself or mixed with something? What would you recommend?
Listen, well, I'm always for simplicity. A person is such a behavioral creature. An irrational being, and adding fiber to your plate 5 times, well, we have a word for that. Compliance. Yes, that is. The adherence to this procedure is very low. People will quit, they'll get tired of it. Yeah, this stuff. That's why it's better to do it regularly, once a day, than some complicated regimen. At the same time, let's say if you do it in the morning, like with most supplements, yeah, I understand that behaviorally it's better to do it in the morning before you get caught up in the chaos. Everything else, we all have a lot to do. Morning is cool because actually fiber absorbs water, it swells up, and it immediately stimulates digestion. Yes, your peristalsis kicks in, you get a feeling of fullness that actually lasts a long time because it absorbs water and expands inside you. There are mechanoreceptors in the walls of the intestines that simply send a signal to the brain, like everything is fine, the stomach is full, the intestines are full. It's like you don't need to eat, you even get some endorphins from it, you feel satisfied, you don't need to keep stuffing yourself with bread, cookies, croissants. You won't get that fullness from them. But with fiber, yes, you will. In the morning, it's actually fine. Well, again, my idea of how everything mixes up later. Overall, in the morning, it's enough, yes. You start forming a food bolus, and all the food that comes before lunch will end up in that same food bolus. Yes, it will end up there. It all rises up there, mixes together, and in the large intestine, it doesn't really matter. Everything is just chpok with each other, so there's really no big problem. If we want to lose weight, morning fiber is the perfect option. If, for example, you're an athlete and you had an intense workout, suppose your muscles are breaking down significantly, or if a lot of lactic acid is produced, then, for example, in the evening, fiber before bed. That's interesting because it's an additional dietary sorbent that will help absorb and remove those toxic compounds that will be released at night. And we worked at Federal Medical Biological Agency. We did a lot of work in the genetics of high-performance sports, especially before the Olympics. I had many colleagues, including foreigners, since these are always international consortia. We select everyone there and review athletes in all long-distance events, skiers, speed skaters, runners, and more. And we look at their genetics, or we look at their stool samples. Is there a microbe that appears more often? And yes, there really is.
So what does that mean?
We see that the adaptation of the microbiome, for example, is the utilization of lactate for those who focus on endurance, who have those long lactate cycles. It would also be interesting here not to forget to keep feeding it. Or maybe something else. Do you have questions about your detox? So in the morning it's fullness, and in the evening, well, it's more about detoxification. If in the evening, for example, you also feel hungry, the kind that's hard for you to get rid of, to satisfy, then this evening hunger too, you can relieve it with this amount of fiber, kind of tricking yourself a little. Yes, because there's this cool kind of noodles called shirataki. I
Tried it
The package claims 0 calories, but that's not true.
while training for competitions. I crave carbs, but couldn't have them. And I brewed it, ate it. Well, to be honest, it's not very tasty. I'll say that.
You can like make a dish out of it, but what's the point? It's made from the root of the kanjak tree. Yeah, so it's 100% fiber. You get 0 sugar and 0 carbs from it in your blood. That's all it is. The food lump will only reach the large intestine, and that's when it will start giving you a slow release of energy. That's due to how the microbes there ferment it. So this is also one of the ways fiber can be beneficial. The third question is, what type of fiber? We've already discussed quantity and timing. The best question is, what kind of fiber? And it turns out that microbes love variety. We, as humans, tend to want everything to be simple and the same every day. Yeah, why does McDonald's win there? A new branch opens worldwide every week because it's simple and convenient for people. Yeah, we want something standard and so on. It's very hard to cook a variety of things. So, but what's the principle? In order to train and nurture your different microbes, you need to give them different types of chemical compounds. Thank you for your attention. This is to offer fiber from various plant sources. If you work out, right, well, you can't become physically developed by doing just 1 or 2 exercises. You'll only be training one muscle. And even the most advanced, the most impressive athletes, in terms of their physique, they work out and train dozens of muscles. And here, you can think of each of these microbes as a kind of biochemical muscle of your own, and you also need to train it by giving it different sources of fiber. So, if you just keep adding that psyllium, adding it over and over all year round, you're actually creating a very uniform environment which at some point can collapse under pressure. Like, I don't know, some kind of epidemic.
Well, put it simply,
Something easier.
something faster.
That's all we have for this. All the most popular apps on the phone are fast food apps, one-button apps.
Well, again, for a person, what do we know? One of the very first studies is what's called crowdfunding, when people could send in, well, let's say, pay a very small amount for their microbiome analysis. They would send their biological material and fill out a set of questionnaires. One of the results of this study is that when a person consumes more than a certain amount of different fibers per week, we see that their microbiome is better than average. And that's a good number. And this number for fiber diversity is 30. We're launching a mini challenge like this in Russia on different social networks with Couche 50. We offer people to eat 50 different sources of dietary fiber in a week. Most people eat 10, maybe 15 at most, and soon start counting on their fingers. There's potato, carrot, cabbage, onion, garlic, and then they run out. Tomato, cucumber, and that's it. They're done. For example, in Russia, we don't eat enough or know about legumes or the many types of cruciferous vegetables. And it's not just that.
Really, broccoli?
Broccoli, and there are plenty of types of cauliflower too, for example, and horseradish. Those are also cruciferous, and our mustard is cruciferous too. Different seeds, all of that fits.
Healthy cruciferous vegetables. When it comes to oncology, we really like to recommend them.
Sulforaphane is also a detoxification, and different berries too, and berries aren't just for berry season. A normal person can always freeze them during the season and take them out of the freezer whenever needed. And often that's the best source of vitamin C. Even better than some questionable fizzy tablets from the pharmacy and so on. So this culture of consuming various herbs or some products that are truly multifunctional, yes, those are supplements. Or maybe someone makes some kind of bread or different types of pasta from various ingredients. All of that counts. And when a person starts eating this way, one of the interesting facts we've noticed is that they suddenly start feeling full from a smaller amount of food. Because when you have a variety of sources, you get not only sources of fiber, but also sources of different minerals, and they automatically become sources of various vitamins, and so on and so on. And, your nutritional density, meaning the amount of micronutrients per gram of food, increases. And a person actually feels happier from this kind of food. A typical hamburger is just a plain white bun, empty calories, some meat, and nothing more. People often
want something specific, but they're just drawn to eating. Hunger is sometimes actually a sign of a poor diet.
Yeah. Well,
I got it about the volume, that it should be as rational and varied as possible, I understand. Tell me, but what about harm to the microbiome, aside from food? Let's consider things like smoking, for example. Is it harmful to our microbiome or not?
Well, smoking in general should be classified under the same, let's say, broad category, which we actually don't really think about, that everything that happens to us, including the air we breathe, all of it affects our gut. Because when we inhale, it all mixes with our saliva and ends up in our gut. Our gut is actually the main organ for cancer protection. All carcinogens around us, except for ultraviolet, affect our gut. It encounters all of them first. Smoking itself, as we see from statistics, takes a long time before a person feels the effects. Well, there's a lot of negativity from the toxic content of these stars and so on and so on. Well, we all know, again, that smoking affects peristalsis. But there, rather, it's more in a positive way, let's say. And when a person quits smoking, they often have problems because before they used to have a cigarette and a morning bathroom routine. It was part of his ritual. Right, but overall, there isn't such a strong, constant toxic effect on the intestines. What we get from food, from regular meals, yes, that's always there. I'm not saying that smoking is good, but whenever you know these things, you always look at the size of the effect. That's what's important. Yes, I'm not denying it. We can debate its effect, but you can always say smoking is about this much. But, for example, added sugar. An average Russian eats about 110 grams of added sugar per day.
Without knowing its origin.
Yes, from everywhere. Yes, that's right. Yes, this does have an effect because, for example, simple sugar that gets onto our mucous membranes is like rocket fuel for all pathogens. Our own microbes have been adapting for millions of years, learning to ferment this fiber, and then humans came along and learned how to do it themselves in just the last 200 years. In fact, yes, extracting this simple sugar, started eating it, and basically created conditions on the mucous membranes for the reproduction of microbes that are, well, useless, that only feed on this sugar. They know how to attack, harm, and kill, but can't digest dietary fibers. If we only ate dietary fibers, the infectious load on all of us would be many times lower. Just based on this microbial logic, I mean...
Basically, when we eat good fiber, we help our gut stay healthy. When we eat junk, we're feeding it to our bad gut flora.
We're not harming it. And I actually have a kids program where children come and we talk about microbes together. At some point, I say I need 2 volunteers. Like Masha and Petya. I say, so Masha only eats vegetables and fruits and Petya only eats candy. Masha and Petya went for a walk and got their feet wet in puddles. Which one of them will get a sore throat first? And the kids kind of come to this answer themselves. So what about Petya? Because he only eats candy, and then we discuss with them why that is, and so on and so forth. They come home telling their parents to throw out the candy and eat vegetables. The parents then call, asking if we're brainwashing the kids.
Tell me, what about alcohol? And if yes, then what kind? A yeast-based product, for example, like beer or vodka?
Yes, do you mean it's allowed, or yes, do you mean it's harmful? No?
Smoking and drinking are the most common bad habits. I want to know their specific impact, especially on your work.
Well, Alcohol, let's say, with the regularity and in the amounts that are common in our country is really a negative factor, and I was looking into it there. We have a term in science called leaky gut, and doctors don't really like this term. I said, "What are you doing there?" Integrative specialists made all this up. Some of the first scientific publications about leaky gut, that is, a leaky intestine, about increased intestinal permeability, appeared in the 1980s. American researchers such as Imena Alkogolia started writing about people who chronically consume alcohol, noting that their intestinal mucosal permeability increases. Later, we applied this to everything else. And this is one of the main functions of alcohol. Due to its alcohol content, it dissolves part of the protective mucus, makes the mucous membrane more accessible, damages it, and causes chronic inflammation. And we see this as a result. More toxic compounds produced by microbes can be found in the bloodstream, and there is also an additional load on the liver. That's interesting. Again, redactor, if we, let's say, don't drink for more days in a week, then, well, there's some kind of balance. Yeah, maybe we did a little damage on Friday, then by the next Wednesday we recovered, 2 days, and we're living just fine. I think that's, well, let's say, an acceptable situation. One of the studies, one of our most cited studies, was about alcoholics from the Psychoneurological Clinic. So these are the people. Why? We were interested because we hypothesized they had this phenomenon. These are people with delirium who have already been admitted and so on and so forth. Before they ended up there, they were on a drinking binge. And a person on a binge, well, sometimes just 50 grams is enough for him. And that's it. He doesn't eat, and he just stays in that state. And we were curious whether we would see an adaptation in the microbes, as if they know this is an alcoholic and they've learned to live differently inside him. The difficulty is that it's impossible to get stool samples from these people, because we need stool samples. It's difficult to collect a sample since they only drank and didn't eat any fiber. And it's super interesting. Well, this was probably one of the first articles on this topic. So why is it so widely cited? What we showed is that in an alcoholic, the microbes adapted to the amount of alcohol, and they're like biodiesel, yes, like a reactor. They use this alcohol to get their own energy. So, microbes will always adapt to your diet, right? If you're an alcoholic, they'll start getting energy from that alcohol and use it to build their own offspring. They need to survive, which makes you believe you are what you eat. The most interesting idea is whether it's possible. The problem with not being able to quit drinking is actually that your microbes are kind of forcing you. They're already used to working on alcohol. There are no guys left there who work on normal fiber. Even after you stop drinking, you still feel a strong urge for that toxic sensation. Yeah, it burns like hell, yeah? Partly this may be because your microbiome is trying to pull you back.
Just like with sweets?
It's the same with sweets. Rebound obesity is the same thing. Well, unfortunately, it's just hard to study this group further. For example, people with obesity. It's known that, for example, if you give them antibiotics to kill off the microbes, though don't try this at home, they reach a stable, low weight more easily. But if you don't do this, the microbes, I'll give an example.
There was an interesting case. A trainer who had been in amazing shape for 20 years. Dobran. In situations, you're Mercurio Tasmanian. Watch how it's done. There's a little cook, I think, who gained 35 kilograms. Naturally, with burgers, chips, ice cream, and candy. And then he never even thought about how easy it was for him to stick to a diet. And later, it became insanely hard for him to start eating right, because the foods he never liked, the ones he was forced to eat. As soon as he started giving them up, it became insanely hard for him to handle at all. So, the absence of these foods made him crave sweets, and until he retrained his gut flora to something normal again. Food. All of this kept going on. You mentioned the protective layer, and right away an ad popped into my head. But also a product that removes that greasy layer where bacteria from a dirty frying pan live. I remembered one of the bacteria and wanted to ask about it. What do you think of Kermans? I read that it lives right in this mucus, in that very layer. And when we starve it, and that's also sometimes the basis for the benefits of fasting, it starts eating this mucus, mucopolysaccharides, and its waste products end up being prebiotics for the health of the flora.
That's exactly right. And that's an example of how, well, and Akkermansia is one of, let's say, ancient microbes that has adapted very well to live with us. There are, as we know, 3 or 4 similar microbes. They are much smaller in size than the others. Yes, because they've lost much of their genome, having already adapted to live with us. So what's happening to us? Well, that is our cells. They are covered with these mucopolysaccharides. It's a protein with sugars sticking out in different directions. It's like a forest of trees. Yes, so the cells are covered with this forest, and the mucus itself is also like the branches of this forest, which holds a large amount of moisture. It turns out that the cells of our intestines can regulate the composition of sugars, these mucopolysaccharides, and in fact they can produce the sugars or the compounds that are eaten specifically by our microbes. Yes, so we are constantly feeding the right flora ourselves. This is just one of the mechanisms, one of dozens of regulatory mechanisms. And Akkermansia is a microbe that when we have plenty of food, like during the lush summer season, berries and so on, it eats fiber, produces a lot of nutrients for our mucosa, and everything is fine. But what happens when the food runs out? It's beneficial for both us and Akkermansia to have it switch. It's like she has a switch, right? She flips it and she starts eating our mucus. And we produce this mucus from our fat reserves and feed her, so that we can actually survive until the next spring, the next summer, and not lose this beneficial microbe. It's like an adaptation mechanism, and our ancestors had it too. The hunger period lasted about 6 months. So for half a year, they feed on fiber, feeding their microbes. For another half a year, there's no fiber, so we feed our microbes with ourselves, basically, just to keep them alive until spring. And for modern people, yes, we understand that this period without fiber can last for decades. Yes, and in this sense, yes. That is, we always have simple carbohydrates available. It's like we don't really need these microbes, right? We don't feed them. They eat our mucus and just die off, leave our body. But along with them, that important quality also leaves, what you call their waste, their regulatory function. The function, basically. Remember, we talked about how immune cells live on the other side of the gut lining. And these immune cells, so when it sees that Akkermansia is on this side, it's a signal for it that everything is fine in the gut. When it sees that there are no beneficial microbes here, but instead some pathogens that feed on sugar are living there, the immune cell here switches to inflammatory mode. It can travel throughout the body, in our joints, in fat tissue, in neural tissue, and activate inflammation mode. And that's actually where the whole theory of non-infectious chronic diseases comes from. They all start in the gut.
Tell me, which groups of people? I actually had questions about carbonated drinks. That question isn't relevant anymore since sugar and soda are clear now. And so my next question is, which groups of people are the most vulnerable and will feel the greatest benefit when everything normalizes for them?
Right now we have what's called the decade of healthy aging. And I think it's really important to let people know that we have an older generation and we can actually help them with their health through very simple things. We conducted a survey among people over 75 years old asking what is the criterion for a good day for you. In the first place, as you can imagine, is being able to go to the bathroom in the morning. If that happens, it means you're doing fine. A huge number of elderly people solve their bowel motility issues in completely unimaginable ways. They eat simple carbohydrates and so on, even though fiber is exactly what all of them really need. If you're watching this program and you have elderly relatives, you can talk to them about the quality of their stool. speak to them directly and answer any questions they have. These are the people who are candidates for using fiber supplements, at least to help with regularity. And then there's cardiovascular health and so on and so on. You can see the results pretty quickly, maybe in 2 or 3 weeks.
You mentioned adults, our parents. Tell me, have these problems always existed among the elderly? And right away, I have another question for you. What's actually happening in the modern world with the composition of our microbiome, with the microbiome itself? Because sperm quality, testosterone levels, everything is getting worse. Accordingly, that means things inside us aren't going very well either.
Probably both fertility and the ability to carry children. That's what we now understand about women. All these dysplasias, all these phenomena, in fact, that start with inflammation of the mucous membrane of the reproductive organs in women and then go deeper. It's all about the same thing. You can trace all of this. It often starts in the intestines, or an inflammatory process in the intestines is a very important factor. Yes, we know, and again in gynecology, when a woman becomes pregnant, we check that she doesn't have any processes in the vagina and none in the mouth. Both the mouth and vagina must be healthy. Yes, simply because in the intestines, let's say, there are no standard criteria for assessing this inflammatory condition, but in fact we need to prepare all the mucous membranes so that there is no inflammatory process, because for a woman, permeability, inflammation of the mucous membranes, and so on. During pregnancy, it increases the inflammatory background. And, well, again, I always try to find some simple analogy. And in my understanding, the immune system, yes, it sees that there is something foreign behind the placenta. Yes, also not very friendly to our body. Yes, there is already a slight inflammation from it. And something is also going wrong in our mouth and also in the vagina. And at some point, the immune system kind of tells itself, listen, we have a very high level of inflammation in the body above the red line. Yes, our host can't really handle this. Maybe this isn't the best time for carrying a child. Let's save all this, like, for another time, like mom. Right now, all these unwanted things begin happening. Premature births, miscarriages, etc. always happens. The risk of these events, as we know, is associated with dysbiosis, inflammation, and the level of lipopolysaccharides in the blood.
You say we know, but you're praising doctors for nothing. I don't know. 95% of them, besides hormones and iron levels, don't see anything else as a cause. And everything you talked about today, leaky gut, the role of the microbiome, and everything else, they see it as nothing but quackery or even ignorance. Why? Because when they hear something they don't know or don't understand, there are only two options. Either they're an idiot or you are. Of those two choices, he'll always pick the one where he knows everything and the other person knows nothing. So basically what you said, top specialists, modern professionals, integrative medicine doctors, those who really take a comprehensive approach. It's not like seeing an endocrinologist who only prescribes hormones or a nutritionist who just focuses on your diet. Health is 360 degrees. I really like what you're saying today, honestly. Honestly, much respect, because you're addressing this issue, even though, as you said, you're not a doctor but a scientist. You see it from all sides, even better than many doctors, and you know how to explain it correctly. And I really like it, because I think this episode that people will watch will be very useful, because a lot of doctors watch me. This is a fundamental thing, because maybe you've been with other people somewhere, but you haven't been with doctors who can really bring value to other doctors. And this will give them a reason to think, to start reading, to start developing, to reconsider some of their approaches. Because this problem, especially infertility, is real and increasingly common. We keep moving forward. And right now, our country has a huge problem with birth rates.
And again, it's super interesting that you brought up this topic. Yes, it's your professional thing. But, for example, I lived in the United States, and there are a huge number of scientific studies on the epidemiology of American residents. And in terms of nutrition and microbiome, it's one of the nations most affected by modern diets. And, well, you also know about the fertility statistics there. It's the most horrifying fertility statistics there.
And obesity as well.
Yes, and obesity. And at some point you realize that it's all connected on one side. But on the other hand, when you think about it as a biologist, you realize that this is also part of natural selection. That if some creatures couldn't adapt and overcome their craving for simple, easily accessible calories, then evolution doesn't really need them. And what about the shutdown of the fertility system? Well, actually, it's more like regulation, because just imagine what kind of children people like that would have.
So, but the same thing happens with obese people, obese children, with
obese people, obese children, and these are children. Well, I mean, there are children there with a diabetic pump. One of the doctors in the United Kingdom told me, he said, we come in, I service this diabetic pump. We open the cabinet for the child, and he has all these snacks in there. The child is 6 years old, and he's already been using this pump for a year. Well, and this is, well, kind of, it's a certain culture. It's where, let's say, well, you know how it is? I don't believe in conspiracy theories. Yeah, I don't believe in that. But on the other hand, when you see how the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry work in a certain synergy to make a person dependent, yeah, on medications from a very young age, yeah, that's not it. After 70, you have to take a pill for blood pressure, right? But starting from 25, you start taking some metabolic medications. This isn't really a conspiracy theory, but you just realize that's how things are set up, that from a certain point of view, it's economically beneficial. Yeah, for everyone to have unhealthy people. And again, when you talk about doctors, I also really like this understanding that this is the very place and the very time where the doctor and the person should start working together. Because, well, maybe for women in labor,
it's, well,
it's a good point, because after all, mothers want the best child. We know that they are very anxious, boy.
in different ways.
They read a lot about health, and here they need to tune in so that the mother learns more about herself and the doctor helps her. Well, in different ways, yeah. You think, listen.
I mentioned this somewhere in an interview. I was at a conference, I think it was Yaroslavl, and there was a coffee break. I went outside to take a walk, talk on the phone, and there was a little kiosk selling vapes. And there's a mum standing there. She's calling her son or daughter. I don't remember. I think her son. She's calling and says, "Son, listen." And I can tell by her voice. I was standing nearby. I could hear that the kid was, I don't know, about 12 or 13 years old, such a child's voice. "Sonny, are you still at school? I'm here buying you something. Which flavor do you want, strawberry or maybe banana?" Well, it was that kind of conversation, so it depends. But I really hope that people will come to this, because we doctors, unfortunately, more and more often, well, not just more often, but most of the time, we treat the consequences already. And people themselves should gain health through this kind of knowledge, through its practical application in their own lives. Because today they listen to you about why you need fiber, how much you need, and what it's for. What does it do for microflora, and why is healthy microflora important? Through explanation, smart and reasonable people understand, start using it, and become healthy. Because honestly, I sometimes get a little tired of my job. Because I treat the consequences, I treat oncology, I remove stones, but I don't treat the root cause. Unfortunately, I often have these patients on the operating table only when I'm already treating the consequences. And I see those people, and today you and I are filming this. This is for people who haven't gotten sick with anything yet, made by Dietary. And if they hear us today and change their lifestyle even a little, maybe some of them won't become my patients, because unless you become my patient, you already know all this. Not about me.
I had such, an interesting experience too. It's actually from your field, brachytherapy. Yes.
We do it.
When those little rods are inserted into the prostate, there's iodine and iridium. Yes. On the ends, these things are attached. What are they called properly?
Microsources.
Microsources emit radiation, and computer technology targets the tumor directly, destroying it with radiation. And we were at the Docrates clinic in Finland, where one of the guys who actually invented this technology works, developed the algorithms and so on. And they were telling us, they give you a task. He says, a guy came to us from Sweden who says, here's what I have. There is a lesion there that needs to be treated now. But first of all, I want to be sexually active to continue. B. In about 2 months, I'll be playing with my soccer team, so I need to be mobile, and I want this to be as minimally invasive as possible. And they say, well, guess how old he was? They guessed, but were wrong. He was 85. So I'm like, what kind of guy is this, right? Who's dealing with these kinds of things? Know what this leads to? What? It's interesting that now we're seeing examples of radical yes. Well, even for our country, life extension, quality of life, we're seeing this. And this, well, is of course a little bit connected to the financial aspect, a little bit to the educational aspect, but mostly it's about a person's mentality. Yes, at any income level and with any education, you can master completely simple things and gain more for yourself thanks to your actions, habits, and consistency. Just that. 10, 15 years of life and, well, a certain appearance. Because, for example, last year my first classmate died, 40 years old, liver, alcohol, and so on and so on. At class reunions, I feel frozen. Honestly, everyone there feels the same way. It's normal for many people, let's say, with a normal body mass index. It's the same story with my classmates. And I think one of our tasks and functions is to show people that it's not about money, but about a certain discipline.
And
a routine. Yes, it's a routine. It's about having the right attitude toward yourself, some self-discipline, and a desire to live. Actually, yes, it's really interesting to live longer with your children, with your grandchildren, to play with everyone, to run around, and to have that, to live a quality life. Yes, 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 and that's it. And that's really cool. You can see that the number of such people is growing more and more. All of us have examples of people who are 10, 15 years older than us, and we say, damn, I want to look like that in 10, 15 years. That's totally normal. That convinces me, and we see what they don't do. Well, it's not about things like plastic surgery, liposuction, and so on. It's about a certain self-discipline in nutrition, in sports, and in many other things.
Tell me, what's the current mega trend in your field? And also, please tell me the statistics, editor, related to this trend.
Probably from the interesting things, from what I actually see, there are 2 or 3 solutions that have almost completed clinical trials, which will make microbes real medicines. Currently, microbes and probiotics are mainly seen as dietary supplements. 2 or 3 companies. They are in the 2nd or 3rd stage of clinical trials, which show that we can prescribe this live microbe just like a pharmaceutical drug. For treatment, yes. One of the areas that's really interesting is chronic pain. So, they found a microbe in healthy people, which, when introduced into the gut of a person with chronic pain, starts to work. It's already been shown there. It's a direct pharmaceutical pathway that helps them produce. Here, in this enteral nervous system, there's more serotonin. And because of this, by bringing a person back to normal functioning, their chronic pain symptoms go away. And for a certain group of patients, this works. In the trials, they've now demonstrated better than ketamine. So the benchmark for pain relief is basically the classic one. And that's, well, I mean, imagine, it's interesting, right? Interesting, isn't it? Another direction is that maybe these people have chronic pain. This happened in the first place because they seriously damaged their serotonin production system in the gut. Yes, meaning that they're in such a bad state that, for example, they had some kind of trauma once and after that they got stuck. They're trapped in pain and have to rely on painkillers, which drastically changes their quality of life. And this creation is called live biotherapeutic products. This is really new, you know, like basically right now we're genetically modifying human cells in pharmacology, right? It's the same thing with these live microbes. That's one major direction, and the second is really about inflammation as the basis of aging.
Inflammaging?
Yes. We are now seeing both in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, in dementia, in all these age-related conditions, we see a huge role of the microbial component. I read some statistics there, something like this, for example, about the oral cavity, about oral health. Each extracted tooth, 2 doctors simply gathered statistics on elderly people and their dental charts. And they looked at who has dementia, who doesn't, and how many teeth have been extracted. Each extracted tooth increases the risk of developing dementia by 1.6%. A person who, let's say, is missing half their teeth has a 30% higher risk of developing dementia. And here, the point isn't about the teeth themselves, but about oral health. And what's also interesting here is that this mucous membrane is the closest to the brain, and everything that happens here doesn't go through the liver. We have a part here, that's why we take some medications orally, because this phase is absorbed here, right? But there's also a downside to that news. It's about how the health of our oral cavity, if it's unhealthy, has a very strong impact on our brain. And on all these neurodegenerative processes as well, and that's actually really great. We know that from the mouth to the anus we can take care of a person. It is necessary to radically reduce the level of inflammation. To assess all of this, I'm sure that these anti-aging medicine clinics will look at all of this together. I have a friend here, Robert Mamikanian, a well-known doctor who works with teeth. It turns out he was one of the first in Russia to introduce this protocol for removing old fillings that contain heavy metals. Amalgam, yes, that's called compound A. We saw this when I lived in the United Kingdom. We saw and discussed it with doctors. There are a lot of gut clinics there. We also saw the same thing, that you do everything for a person regarding their gut, but nothing seems to work. Nothing gets better. If you don't remove it, if you don't find it, if you don't figure out what they are, at some point we figured out that he had an old filling there and lead was leaking from it. A persistent low-level toxin seeps into the intestines and destroys everything inside. We removed it, there's a brief spike, then the toxicity fades, and your intestines begin recovering. Well, you know, Robert, I like him. You know, he jokes like this. He says something like, "We were always taught in dental school that the mouth is separate and the whole body is separate. But now we're starting to understand that the mouth, the vagina, all of it, it's all part of one thing, and we need to take care of all of it."
I have a friend, his name is Roma, he's also a dentist. And he says, if I see unhealthy mucous membranes in the mouth, I send the patient to an endocrinologist. If I see slow healing, I also send them to an endocrinologist. It's just a manifestation, a way to look inside the body. You touched on the topic of psychological health. I'm answering one of the questions. And the next question is, can the microbiota affect a person's mental health?
You know, it all started with communication, and I guess I was lucky. At some point I found myself in an environment where I had access to our leading Russian specialists, and later to foreign specialists and doctors. Just practitioners you could talk to, and I wasn't even 30 yet, and I could talk to them. We all asked them the same thing. In your field, do you notice any particular features in your patients regarding their intestines? With psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia, that's a familiar story, or with various childhood manifestations, with autism, with attention deficit disorder. There are also intestinal disorders, what is called comorbidity. These accompanying issues are always present, and every time we start working with gut health, the course of the main disease improves. One of the things that became a symptom during my lifetime, because before it wasn't even seriously discussed, is anxiety. It's there in the International Classification of Diseases. They've learned how to assess it, and in many countries it's already being diagnosed. And for example, anxiety and irritable bowel syndrome. They're basically like brothers, you know, they always go together, and this is very interestingly connected to how our physiology works. I mean, we've already talked about it. The food bolus, the mucous immune system, and also here, it's like wires from the brain go to our mucous membrane, which basically act as sensors. You know, At some point, I have friends who work at Conseil Européen pour la Recherche Nucléaire. That's the collider, and they show photos from there. A huge number of sensors are connected to every millimeter of that collider to detect those rare particles that appear during acceleration. I said it's the same in the intestines. We actually have nerve endings connected to every millimeter, to every single villus. There are villi and microvilli, and each villus has a nerve ending attached to it. If a pathogen appears at this nerve ending, a signal reaches the brain within 20 minutes. Or if a beneficial microbe appears, then within 40 minutes to an hour, a signal is sent that there's a beneficial microbe there. Now let's imagine a person with dysbiosis or irritable bowel syndrome. All of their nerve endings are sending signals to the brain that something needs to be changed. When we were like little worms, we would just crawl in the other direction where there was different food. Yes, now we are highly developed beings. We get a signal in our brain that something needs to change. What do we do? Question.
Regarding eczema, various rashes, and psoriasis, can normalizing the microflora cure these diseases? Because it's often said that if you have skin problems on your face, then it's the intestines. A rash appears, it's the intestines. Is it a mirror, a reflection of your internal problems? When we visit a dermatologist, he typically treats it with an ointment or some local remedies with antibiotics that are used. So, if we look at the root cause from a pathogenetic perspective, is there any way from your side to address this?
Yes, what we see is that for most of these diseases, there's a connection with the gut. And again, you know, as a biologist, what is a human? It's a human. He is covered with skin on the outside, and then there is a boundary between the skin and the mucous membrane, and it goes inside. These boundaries exist at the lips, anus, and other openings, but not beneath the skin. So, in fact, it's actually the same tissue inside us and outside us, and with lymph, it connects very easily. That's why, if some inflammatory process happens in the intestine, this inflammation, with the help of these very inflammation molecules, travels and very easily ends up under the skin, and this hypersensitivity of ours manifests itself as inflammatory reactions on the skin. It's often connected to the fact that there's a high level of some imbalance in the intestine, simply because it's a huge organ. But again, we see all of this from our own practice. We start working on the intestine and everything goes away. Yes, of course, the problem is much more complicated, and here we shouldn't underestimate all those topical remedies and so on and so on. But here's what I see in different cities. For example, in Moscow, we had a big meeting with dermatologists, and most dermatologists support this. They see this situation, they already see it. Well, what will happen if they don't start working? They know that without addressing the gut, the waiting line won't go away. The same people will keep coming to them again and again and again. And maybe, even if they're in a private clinic, maybe it brings in money, but the person gets tired. Yes, your line keeps growing, not shrinking. We've also visited other cities. Well, it's still kind of hard for them to accept this thing about the intestines, but the process is ongoing. And again, you know, there's this emerging concept called beauty from the inside out. Yes, inside out beauty. And a lot of brands are promoting this. Everyone who is now working with the skin microbiome, yes, it turns out that microbes also live on the surface of our skin. And they are basically connected to the health of our gut. If we start taking proper care of both our skin and our gut, then overall we'll feel good. My eyes were opened when I started spending time with different wild tribes. I had the idea to find people who don't eat store-bought food. That means there are no preservatives or antibiotics. By digging around in their poop, they can find some microbes that we have long since lost. City dwellers. I noticed that although people there don't wash themselves, their skin, hair, and scalp look better than those of city dwellers, even at 65 years old. Yes, and you realize that all of our modern industry of washing with surfactants, when I started to look into it, it's actually a whole explosion in cosmetology, what we've been doing for the last 100 years, right? With alkaline substances, we remove both the layer of microbes and the hydrolipid mantle from the skin, leaving the skin dry and pristinely clean. Some companies offer us to apply something very strange. Yes, something mostly derived from petroleum, like this. And on this same skin, pathogenic microbes instantly grow, which emit a bad odor, cause us skin problems, and so on and so forth. It's a closed cycle involving our use of soap and other products. There was this man, he was watching the horses, and he noticed that when a horse got sweaty, it would go and roll around in the dust. And he thought, maybe it's trying to pick up some microbes there. He took some microbes from there, transferred them onto his own skin, stopped washing himself, and didn't wash for about 5 years. And he demonstrated this effect, that because he had microbes living on his skin, they would process his own sweat into nitric oxide, which in your profession is about male potency, right? For a surgeon, it's about vascular health. For a dermatologist, it's actually about good antibacterial action, right? Regarding vasodilation, blood circulation, and improving skin blood flow, he has no pathogens. So before soap appeared, people lived in balance. They lived like that. I call it, a microbial cloud. What you release, microbes process it and create a small cloud of gas. Right there, it's nano-sized, and that's what you live in, and no pathogen can stick to you. And the opposite story, right? Why does our sweat smell? Our sweat, as a secretion, doesn't smell at all. It starts to smell when putrefactive microbes, conditionally pathogenic microbes, process it into something that, evolutionarily speaking, causes odor. It's programmed in us that this is a bad smell, we need to run away. Europeans, yes, as a developing civilization, and again, perfumery itself, yes, it developed at the point when women needed to show that they didn't smell like illness, but smelled like health. To remove that smell, all this game of masking actually is being cancelled now. And the same brands that used to make big money in cosmetics by hiding the problem have now turned towards solving it. That's interesting. This process is happening quickly in cosmetology, and it's noticeable because the results are visible. Yeah, with supplements or fiber, it's not as obvious, but here you're applying live microbes or their remnants directly to your skin. And you see the result, your skin gets better, it behaves differently. And you see and you understand that every organ in the human body has the ability to regenerate, to recover. If you just help it and don't interfere, don't harm it.
Briefly and concisely, diabetes, microflora.
Diabetes and microflora are interconnected through the word inflammation. One of the most interesting things I've seen is cognitive impairment, cognitive issues that occur in people with diabetes and in animal models. If we start practicing intermittent fasting, our microbiome changes and diabetic cognitive impairments disappear. And it all comes down to the fact that a certain background of our flora is associated with inflammation, obesity, and metabolic disorders. It also creates what is called brain fog in English, as a symptom, literally a fog in the head when a person can't think clearly. And there are certain dietary regimens like intermittent fasting that simply remove this for a person, even in the presence of diseases. And this works specifically through the microbiome.
Microbes and detox. I wanted to ask this question right at the beginning. As you know, there is a detox method, although in fact it's actually the opposite, an anti-detox. When? With a large volume of liquid hydrocolotherapy, colonotherapy, they flush it out.
The large intestine.
They completely wash out all fecal blockages. But along with that, it turns out they wash out almost all, including the beneficial microflora. And it turns out, considering what we've discussed, that microflora helps with detox. So, in fact, they actually make intoxication worse. That's the question. Exactly.
First of all, it's really a natural part of our detoxification process, meaning that without microbes it happens much worse. First, second, as you correctly said, these extreme methods with high pressure, like hydrocolonic therapy, are not really good. Yes, for example, an enema is gentle, doesn't put pressure on the mucous membrane, and doesn't flush out the mucosa. It's just that a person needs to strain their muscles and so on. Hydrocolonotherapy is something that's easy. Yes, you don't do anything. Everything is basically done for you. Symptomatically, yes, you'll improve since the microbial toxicity was removed, but flushing with water also removed the child. One of the most interesting things we observe is that detoxified substances, Detox is super interesting. It turns out that when our microbes aren't fed, say the same fiber, for example, then the liver, during the detoxification process in the very last phase, to remove toxic compounds, it starts attaching additional substances to them. One example is glucuronic acid. About 30-40% of all detoxified substances are glucuronic acid. And an observable fact in microbiology is that if microbes are not fed, they start eating this glucuronic acid off the toxic compounds, and they become toxic again. These can include medications, hormones, and more. So microbes actually feed from our garbage, making it toxic again. Sorting through the garbage. Yes. Sorting and scattering this waste. I have a shelter dog like that. She sometimes runs to the neighbors and scatters things around. So microbes, if you don't feed them, if you don't take care of them, they start doing the same thing. This is an important process. Again, we can't really assess it yet, but it's important to know about it. Especially maybe, for medical or similar fields. It seems to me that issues related to female hormones should be considered because disruptions in the female hormonal cycle, in my opinion, are often linked to detoxification and poor gut function. So if you're a patient or if you are suffering from a hormonal imbalance and at the same time you have a bowel movement only once every 3 days, then you shouldn't start with hormonal correction, but rather with regulating your bowel movements. Do it once a day, it's easy, and you'll see how things change after. If someone has a bowel movement every 3 days, that means for 3 days, the food stays in the intestines and something happens to it. It's unhealthy, it's very toxic. For us, it means that all other processes also aren't working at that moment, so things need to work regularly.
What's your attitude towards keto and any specific type of diet? For example, only intermittent fasting, only paleo, only keto? I recently had a guest. He's not a nutritionist though, but he says there should be variety. A mono diet is bad.
Well, yeah, maybe I think so too. From that kind of, life experience, it seems that religious devotion to a certain type of diet is a sign of some kind of mental unhealthiness as well, right? So a person is trying to control at least something in their life, right? And he chooses a diet, and now if he eats only lard and avocado, he feels better. But this has nothing to do with his actual health and nutrition. Keto is a cool protocol. It's very trendy. It appeared. Well, it's been around for probably about 10 years already. I saw the rise and fall of this story in Europe. And the problem is that on keto, we cut out carbohydrates. We say that you shouldn't have more than a certain amount, a really small amount per day. But the problem is also that when we say carbohydrates, we usually mean dietary fiber as well. We cut those out too. On a keto diet, you do the same. As a result, you don't feed your microbiome enough dietary fiber. But in essence, yes, you need to be on keto so your blood sugar doesn't go up. If you understand biochemistry, dietary fibers actually produce fatty acids during fermentation, which in turn helps support your fat metabolism. And when people go on this keto diet for a year and do this kind of extreme thing, it's not good. I understand that by experimenting for a week and developing metabolic flexibility, you can fast for a few days or do intermittent fasting. But then you relax and you can live absolutely calmly in society and eat what you like. That's the healthiest option.
The carnivore diet is...
Carnivore is when you really switch to eating only meat products. And there are a lot of followers now in America because of Jordan
Peterson. I think he only eats meat.
Yeah, that's the trend now, so let's do it. And they say that our ancestors, they really did eat only meat. And at the same time, in their videos, they show these steaks from American cows. But we, for example, observed our reindeer herders and a reindeer herder. When he eats a reindeer calf, he starts, first of all, with the internal organs. He gets a huge amount of connective tissue, a huge amount of minerals and everything else. A reindeer's thigh is tough and not suitable for steak, so there's no way to confuse it here. And what's interesting is that connective tissue itself There are the same mucopolysaccharides there, the ones found in joints, cartilage, and the intestines. If you eat this, it gets fermented in your intestines, so it's like a kind of animal fiber, and it supports you. But if you only eat muscle fibers, which by the way you also have to chew, most likely it doesn't go well for you. And this often happens with athletes. An excess of protein leads to a lot of protein ending up in the large intestine. Excess protein in the large intestine begins to rot. It has a specific smell and the stool's acidity rises to 8 or higher. And here I can only recall our compatriot Mechnikov, who explained that we poison ourselves with the products of decay from our own intestines. 100 years ago he drew attention to this phenomenon, and this phenomenon still persists today. You just need to be more careful with this meat. Don't fall into the trap of thinking our ancestors ate like this. They didn't have steaks, they ate mice, kerboas, and similar things.
Give me some life hacks.
Oh, sometimes it's better to eat nothing than to eat just anything. That's me. Even my older wife has sons, and I'm trying. And you know, maybe it's some kind of our Soviet thing, that you put something in your mouth and you realize it's not right, but you still eat it. Well, because it's kind of food, you know, or like...
You ordered it.
You paid for it. Yeah, you have to finish it. If you feel like it's not yours, not right for you, you can absolutely... You don't have to swallow it. Just like with a huge number of things in life, it's enough if it's not yours. Yeah, I don't know, work anything at all. You don't have to swallow it. Just calmly refuse, look for your own nourishment, your own pleasure will definitely help you. First, second, of course, you need to set up interventions for yourself. You need to train your flexibility in eating, in your approach in abstaining from food. At the very least, yes, again, we live in a place where there is a certain cultural code. At the very least, every person should master something like fasting for themselves. Yes, not even religiously, but at least nutritionally. Pay attention to this, because what happens, you give up a large amount of refined animal food. And during these almost 1.5 months, yes, you cleanse your taste buds, you cleanse your mucous membranes, and so on, and you get a taste for life and for food. Thank you. Enjoy your meal. To be continued. Especially since we usually have this spiritual feast in Moscow during Lent. Many dishes are available everywhere, in any cafeteria. You can eat fasting food and notice where you're drawn to find the connection between the microbiome and brain. And third, probably, you know, how to understand that the best way to diagnose the state of your gut isn't some super tests. It's what's on your plate, what's in your toilet, how your skin looks, how your face looks, whether you have swelling or not, how you sleep, how much energy you have, and what your mood is like. So, in general, your overall health reflects what you eat, what's happening in your gut, and that's what you should focus on. So, if you're feeling bad, just rewind a bit. Like, damn, what did I have? What was going on recently? Well, it's like something's off. I just don't have enough energy. And there was, I don't know, eclair and something else. But learning to create these cause and effect connections between your overall well-being, your appearance, and what you ate is really important. Thank you.
I really like the phrase, eat not what tastes good, but what makes you feel good afterwards.
I agree, thanks.
You and I were supposed to make a dietary supplement in my IPSUM line to help people restore their flora. Tell me, how difficult is it and what is the main challenge? Thank you.
To restore the flora.
No, I mean creating a dietary supplement, because a lot of people sell supplements, but as you know, most of them don't work.
Well, at least I want to find something suitable for the gut. Well, you know, for example, the form factor is very convenient for people. Most people like pills. The tasks that we solve for IPSUM is the problem that you can't pack more than 1 gram into a single pill. Even if someone takes 2 or 3 pills daily, it's still a small amount. But fiber wins by quantity. Yes, so it's convenient for a person to have capsules, but what we'd like to feed them with requires a large volume. That's why we have to choose combinations that work in, let's say, lower concentrations, but at the same time don't cost an arm and a leg. Yes, so the first thing is to try, and second, I really enjoy these kinds of optimization tasks, and I always love looking for great Russian sources of raw materials. Because, well, it's no secret that our dietary supplement market heavily depends on imports that are brought here. Yes, but at the same time, our country is rich. One of the richest countries. Yes, with all sorts of phytocomponents. And to find manufacturers who can actually produce pharmaceutical grade ingredients and create something useful based on them. That's really cool, right? I mean, it's something you can actually be proud of. You
do realize that many people don't appreciate this. For most buyers, the main criteria are the price and the number of pills. Unfortunately,
on one hand, yes, but on the other hand, I look at IPS. And someone even wrote to me in my Telegram channel that, for example, Dietary has such a product line and so on and so on. What does he say? Well, yes, it costs more. But I understand, yeah, we kind of do. Our goal here isn't to make money off of 50 million buyers who want to buy something for 300 rubles and just be done with it. It's just a mental urge that they are taking care of their health, right? So most likely it's for an audience that understands it costs money. Yeah, honestly, I'll tell you, if you're not ready to spend at least 1,000 to 2,000 rubles a month on your gut, then go calculate how much that is in vegetables. We already discussed this today. So, in any case, you're saving money by using this kind of technological solution. Again, you need to be mature about this. Don't look at it as a cure-all. Yes, your gut depends on what you do every day, not on what vitamins you bought at Ipsum. Yes, they can help you in your effort to improve your condition, but 99% of success is you, your attitude, your diligence, and the new daily habits you form for your gut health.
Old lady, this is before her.
Yes, before the old lady, despite
the fact that I produce myself and we already have a large company. And I always say the most important thing is your routine, your lifestyle, how you sleep, what you eat. That's very important. And that's just, an add-on, because if you don't have that pyramid you mentioned, nothing else will work. I probably have 2 final questions, but they're quite important. I haven't asked these questions yet. Pivot Neranye R. Wrapping up, was this your first time, V? Probably autism is the first thing you mentioned in modern times. The roots of it actually come from problematic areas, including from
problematic microflora, yes. What's going on? With children? Cesarean section, lack of breastfeeding, mothers who are already atopic, exposure to all sorts of toxic compounds when a child grows up in the city, and basically the absence of normal, adequate, quality nutrition. All of this is reflected in the current statistics of childhood diseases. Once I just wrote down various childhood diseases for myself and wrote down the statistics. Yes, for example, childhood obesity, things like that, attention deficit disorder, autism. Autism in Western countries is already 1 in 10 or maybe 1 in 17, and then there's attention deficit disorder. Up to 15% of children under 18 experience this, endocrine disorders, this, that, and all sorts of other things. And I suddenly realized that this is the generation that will grow up alongside my children. By the time they reach adulthood, at least half of them will have at least one chronic illness. If the statistics keep going in the same direction. Well, it's not just the hair on your head that stands up, it's all over your body from realizing this. And what does that mean? It means that even if I locally save my own children from these chronic diseases, the problems of modern times and so on, the society they will live in is a society of chronically ill people who have health problems. On a regular basis, they take pharmaceutical drugs or, let's say, some medications for their stable mental state. I suddenly thought, damn, it looks like we're the last generation that really has to solve this problem and help the children, well, not to end up among those 50% with chronic diseases. Things are changing. Many parents are reasonable, but some are not. And, well, It's just a complete nightmare, yes. When one of the leading Moscow endocrinologists, we were at a school event in 2018 or 2019. We asked her for childhood obesity statistics. She said 1%. I then asked how she calculated that. She said, well, out of the children who came to our endocrinology centers, we looked at how many of them, let's say, had obesity. I asked, did you ever think you could just do it another way? Measure the height and weight of children in 5 different schools on average, and we'll see that it's not 1%, but 20 or even 25% childhood obesity. And actually, there are such studies about Russia by Western epidemiologists with Russian last names, which suggest and show this. And what does this mean? That if a doctor looks at it like this and reports it, I don't know, to the minister, we don't have childhood obesity, just 1% in Moscow. It might be good for him, but it has nothing to do with reality. And this is also an important part, to learn to face the truth, because only then can you do something good. And here, all the questions about children's nutrition, all the questions about how, as busy parents, it's more convenient for us to use processed foods. Not to cook food, a cartoon instead of reading a book, a tablet instead of going out together for a walk or to the playground. And in the end, it's not really a question for us as a generation, right? What can we do? And it's kind of, a worldview question, Here you just have to talk about it and maybe set an example yourself. That's all you can do.
To discuss it, we have a president, and the main agenda now is boosting the birth rate. And not being a doctor and getting information through reports, naturally, he's probably being told that everything is fine everywhere, everything is great. But in reality, we have to solve this problem ourselves. A healthy nation starts with a healthy family. A healthy family is a healthy nation. That's why what you're doing is great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
For, first of all, coming to us today. You found time in your busy schedule. We've probably been texting and calling each other for, a few months now, I guess. Either I was on vacation, or you were on vacation, or someone flew somewhere, but finally it happened. I'm very glad. And probably not a question, but say something. To our subscribers, our listeners.
Followers, Zoya. Oh, great. That's a question. Well, we're recording this right after New Year's. It's actually the first working day. I don't know when this will come out, and I want to wish...
In the evening,
10 o'clock in the evening. Yes. I just want to wish that this spark, which a person always has at the beginning of the year, for something good, for some achievements, so that it finds support in certain circumstances, in close people, in those who understand you. Because it often happens that you're in a great mood. Yes, but you can't find that combination, that next gear that would help you keep this attitude for great health and a great life. There are some directions of your own, right? Not to be alone with this, right? And probably, I wish to share, yes, if you have any ideas about your own health, what to do in your own life, share with the people around you as much as possible. And then this enthusiasm will be picked up and shared. And this is just a super, super cool thing. To start the new year with some self-improvement, improving what's around you, and that's it. That's it, and it will help create an awesome next generation.
Subtitles provided by. And thank you so much for everything you do for me personally as IPSUM, and for the information you shared today, which I believe you gave to our subscribers. My life principle is very simple. The more you give, the more life gives back to you. So I wish you all the best. All the very best.